My mother-in-law thought her demand for my phone's PIN would expose my secrets, but by the end of dinner, her own darkest truth was laid bare. The scent of over-roasted rosemary and simmering resentment filled my mother-in-law's house. It was a smell I'd become intimately familiar with over the past 2 years. Sunday dinner at Carol's was less a family gathering and more a weekly tribunal, where my performance as a wife, daughter-in-law, and general human being was quietly but thoroughly evaluated. My husband, Mark, called it her way of showing she cares. I called it death by 1,000 paper cuts. This Sunday was no different. Carol, a woman whose smile never quite reached her cold, calculating eyes, was holding court at the head of the dining table. My father-in-law, a man who had perfected the art of becoming invisible in his own home, was methodically working his way through his roast beef. Mark, bless his heart, was trying to fill the tense silence with a story about a frustrating client at his architecture firm. I was pushing a roasted potato around my plate, trying to look engaged while mentally running through my escape plan. "Mark, dear, don't talk about work at the table," Carol chirped, cutting him off mid-sentence. "It's so dreadfully boring. Let's talk about something more pleasant." "Anna," she said, her gaze locking onto me, "I was just telling my friend Margaret how wonderfully you've settled into the family. You're like a real daughter to me now." I felt a chill despite the warmth of the room. Compliments from Carol were never just compliments. They were the prelude to an attack. They were the polite cough before the public execution. I offered a tight, non-committal smile. "That's very kind of you to say, Carol." "Oh, it's true," she continued, dabbing her lips with a perfectly creased linen napkin. "And families should be built on a foundation of absolute trust and transparency, don't you think? No secrets. Nothing to hide from the people who love you most." My stomach clenched. Here we go. Mark, oblivious, nodded in agreement. "Of course, Mom. We all trust each other." "I'm so glad to hear you say that, sweetie," she cooed, her eyes still fixed on me. "Because there's a little something I've been meaning to ask Anna. It's a matter of family security, really." I placed my fork down, my appetite completely gone. The air grew thick and heavy, the clinking of my father-in-law's knife against his plate the only sound. "What is it, Carol?" I asked, my voice betraying a slight tremor. She leaned forward, her expression a grotesque mask of sweet concern. "Well, dear, with all the scams and things you hear about these days, I worry. Mark is my only son, and you, well, you're his whole world. I just think, for peace of mind, it would be best if I had the PIN code to your phone." The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the blood drain from my face. I looked at Mark, expecting him to laugh, to tell his mother she was being ridiculous. But he just sat there, a deer in the headlights, a faint, uncomfortable smile plastered on his face. My father-in-law suddenly seemed very interested in a spot on the ceiling. I must have misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" I managed to whisper. "Your PIN code, dear," Carol repeated, her voice as smooth as silk. "Just so I know everything is above board. It's a simple gesture of trust. After all," she delivered the line with the precision of a surgeon, "a decent girl has nothing to hide." The words hung in the air, a blatant accusation disguised as a folksy saying. She was calling me indecent. She was implying I had secrets, that I was a threat to her son, to her family. Every small criticism, every backhanded compliment, every condescending piece of advice she'd ever given me suddenly clicked into place. This wasn't about security. This was about control. It was the final move in her long game to completely own me, to strip away my last piece of privacy and autonomy. I stared at her, my mind racing. I felt a surge of white-hot anger, so intense it made me dizzy, but I also felt trapped. The two men at the table, my husband and my father-in-law, were staring at their plates, effectively abandoning me to the lioness. Saying no would be an admission of guilt in Carol's twisted court of opinion. It would prove her point. She had me cornered. "Mom," Mark finally mumbled, his voice weak. I don't think that's really necessary." "Nonsense, Mark," Carol snapped, not even glancing at him. "This isn't about necessity, it's about principle. It's a family matter. If Anna is truly part of this family, she won't have a problem with it. It's just 4 little numbers." She smiled that razor-sharp smile again. "So, Anna, what's your PIN?" I looked from Carol's smug face to Mark's cowardly one. In that moment, something inside me broke. The part of me that wanted to please, the part that endured the weekly interrogations for the sake of peace, it just shattered. I was done. Done being tested, done being judged, done being treated like a criminal who had to prove her innocence. But a simple no wasn't enough. It wouldn't just be a refusal. It would be a declaration of war, and if I was going to war, I wasn't going to be the only one with casualties. I took a slow, deliberate sip of water, my hand perfectly steady. I set the glass down with a soft click. The room was utterly still, everyone waiting for my answer. I looked my mother-in-law dead in the eye, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. "You're absolutely right, Carol," I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the silence like a shard of glass. "A family should have no secrets." I picked up my phone from the table. Her eyes gleamed with triumph. She thought she'd won. "Okay," I said, holding her victorious gaze. "You want my PIN? You can have it. But on one condition." Carol's triumphant smirk wavered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. She hadn't anticipated a negotiation. In her world, her word was law, and my role was to obey. "A condition?" she asked, her voice dangerously sweet. "Yes," I said, leaning forward and placing my elbows on the table, mirroring her posture from moments before. I was no longer the timid mouse she was toying with. "My condition is that we make this a true family policy, a new era of trust and transparency, just like you said. You give me the PIN to your phone and your husband gives me his. And Mark will give me his too, of course. For that matter, you should all have each other's." My father-in-law, who had been a silent statue all evening, actually choked on a piece of carrot. He coughed into his napkin, his eyes wide. Carol's face, which a moment ago was flushed with victory, was rapidly turning a pale, waxy color. That's not the same thing at all," she stammered, her composure cracking. "Why not?" I asked, my voice genuinely curious. I opened my own phone and held it up. "My PIN is 1988, the year I was born. There, now you have it. The first step towards total family transparency has been taken by me. Now it's your turn. After all, a decent family has nothing to hide, right?" I smiled, using her own words, her own saccharine tone, and watched them land like tiny, poisoned darts. "This is absurd," she finally snapped, her mask of civility falling away to reveal the raw, controlling fury beneath. "I am your mother-in-law. I am concerned about my son's welfare. And I'm your daughter-in-law," I countered, my voice still perfectly level. "And I'm concerned about the family's welfare. For all I know, you could have a secret gambling debt. Or maybe you're being blackmailed. These things happen. If Mark and I are going to build a future, we need to know the family foundation is secure. So I don't just want your PIN code, Carol. I want the login and password for your online banking, and your husband's, and your investment portfolio, all of it. We can write them all down on a piece of paper and put it in the family safe. Equal access for everyone. No secrets." "You are being deliberately disrespectful," Carol hissed, her hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles were white. "Am I?" I turned my gaze to my husband. "Mark? Is it disrespectful to take your mother's words about trust and transparency and apply them to everyone equally? Or are the rules different for me? Am I the only one in this family who needs to prove I'm decent?" Mark looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. He opened and closed his mouth like a fish, his eyes darting between me and his mother. "Anna, come on," he pleaded. "Mom, let's just drop it. It was a bad idea." "No," I said firmly, my eyes locked on his. We're not dropping it. Your mother just accused me of being untrustworthy and demanded access to my private life. She did it in front of you and you let her. So either we all live by these new rules, or your mother apologizes for suggesting them in the first place." "Apologize!" Carol shrieked, all pretense of composure gone. "Apologize for wanting to protect my son from a secretive, manipulative—" "Enough," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through her tirade like a knife. The finality in my tone silenced the entire table. The roast beef sat cold and forgotten. The argument was over. This was something else now. I slowly folded my napkin and placed it on the table. I stood up, my chair making a soft scraping sound on the polished wood floor. I looked down at Mark, who was still sitting there, paralyzed by indecision. I felt a wave of pity for him, but it was quickly washed away by a cold tide of disappointment. "I see how it is," I said quietly, speaking only to him now. "Transparency is a one-way street, a weapon for your mother to use against me. And you're okay with that." I didn't wait for an answer. I walked to the hall closet, retrieved my coat and my purse, and put them on. I could feel 3 pairs of eyes burning into my back. Carol's were filled with hate, her husband's with shock, and Mark's were filled with a pathetic, panicked plea. But he didn't move. He didn't stand up. He didn't say a word. I walked to the front door and put my hand on the knob. I paused, but I didn't turn around. I spoke to the wood of the door, but my words were meant for the man sitting at the table. "Mark," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion, "you have 60 seconds to decide. You can either walk out this door with your wife, or you can stay here with your mother. But if you stay, don't bother coming home. I'm changing the locks." The 60 seconds that followed were the longest of my life. The only sound in the house was the loud, frantic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, each tick a hammer blow against my resolve. Tick, he's thinking about it. Talk, he's weighing his life with me against an easy life with his mother. Tick, he's a coward. Talk, I'm going to be alone. I kept my back to them, my hand clenched so tightly on the cold brass doorknob that my fingers ached. I would not turn around. I would not beg. This was his choice, a decision that would define the rest of our lives. "Mark, don't you dare." Carol's voice sliced through the silence, low and venomous. "Don't you let her manipulate you like this. She's showing her true colors. This is what she does. She's trying to tear our family apart." I heard the sound of a chair scraping back. My heart leaped into my throat. For a wild, hopeful second, I thought it was Mark, but then I heard his weak, wavering voice. "Mom, please, Anna, honey, just come back to the table. We can talk about this. Let's not make a scene." A scene. That's what this was to him. An embarrassing social faux pas, not a fundamental betrayal of our marriage. The last flicker of hope I had died out, replaced by a chilling clarity. I had married a boy, not a man. A boy who would always, always choose the path of least resistance, which invariably led straight back to his mother. "There's nothing left to talk about, Mark," I said, my voice flat. The clock continued its relentless countdown. 30 seconds left. I could feel the finality of it all settling over me like a shroud. I was about to walk out of this house and into a new, uncertain life. It was terrifying. But the thought of walking back to that table, of surrendering to Carol and spending the rest of my life with a man who wouldn't defend me, was infinitely more so. "If you walk out that door," Carol threatened, "you are no longer welcome in this house. You are no longer part of this family." "Good," I said without hesitation. "Your family is a cage, Carol, and you're the zookeeper. I'm letting myself out." The final tick of the clock echoed in the hall. My 60 seconds were up. He hadn't moved. He hadn't chosen me. With a deep, shuddering breath, I turned the knob. The lock clicked, the sound cannonballing through the silent house. I pulled the door open, and the cool night air hit my face. It felt like my first breath of freedom. "Anna, wait!" Mark's voice finally panicked, finally decisive, but far too late. I was already stepping over the threshold. I didn't stop, didn't look back. I walked down the stone path, my heels clicking a sharp, angry rhythm on the pavement. I heard the front door open wider behind me, heard him call my name again, more desperately this time. I kept walking. I got to my car, fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking with adrenaline and rage. I jammed the key into the ignition and the engine roared to life. In the rearview mirror, I could see him standing on the porch, a helpless figure bathed in the warm, yellow light of the house he had chosen over me. His mother stood in the doorway behind him, a dark, triumphant silhouette. Tears I hadn't even realized were forming began to stream down my face. Not tears of sadness, but of fury. Fury at Carol for her cruelty, at Mark for his weakness, and at myself for enduring it for so long. I slammed the car into drive and peeled out of their driveway, leaving tire marks on the pristine asphalt. It was a petty, childish act, but it felt immensely satisfying. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, the city lights blurring through my tears. I replayed the scene over and over in my head. Her smug face, his panicked eyes, the ticking of that damn clock. I had called her bluff, and in doing so, had been forced to call his. He had failed. Our marriage had failed. My phone started buzzing incessantly in my purse. I ignored it. It would be Mark, full of panicked apologies and flimsy excuses. He would promise to talk to her, promise things would be different. But they wouldn't. He had shown me who he was. When I finally pulled up to our house, my house now, I felt a strange sense of calm. The decision was made. The worst had happened. I walked inside, the silence of the empty space a welcome relief. I went straight to my laptop and pulled up the website for a 24-hour locksmith. As I filled out the emergency request form, an email notification popped up on my screen. It was from Mark's father. I almost deleted it without reading, assuming it was a guilt-ridden plea for me to be the bigger person and reconcile. But curiosity got the better of me. The subject line was just one word: proof. Confused, I opened the email. There was no text, just a single password-protected PDF attachment. A moment later, a text message came through from a number I didn't recognize. It was just a string of numbers and letters. The password. My hands trembled as I copied and pasted the password into the prompt. The document opened. It was a scanned copy of a bank statement. Not a recent one, but one from 6 years ago, before I had even met Mark. My eyes scanned the page, trying to make sense of what I was looking at, and then I saw it. A series of massive withdrawals, tens of thousands of dollars, all made out to a single entity, St. Jude's Rehabilitation Center. But it wasn't the payments that made my blood run cold. It was the name at the top of the statement. It wasn't my father-in-law's account, it was Carol's. My mind struggled to process the information. Carol? In rehab? It seemed impossible. This was a woman who preached tirelessly about control, discipline, and propriety. Her entire identity was built on a foundation of flawless, judgmental superiority. The idea of her having a secret so profound, so human, was world-shattering. I scrolled through the pages. The withdrawals were regular, substantial, and spanned several months. This wasn't a brief spa weekend to dry out. This was a serious long-term stay. Why would her husband send this to me? Was it a peace offering? A bizarre attempt to make me feel sorry for her? Or was it a warning? The word he used in the subject line, proof, echoed in my head. Proof of what? That she was a hypocrite? I already knew that she had secrets of her own. That much was now glaringly obvious. My phone buzzed again. It was Mark. I let it go to voicemail, then another call, and another. A string of frantic text messages followed. "Anna, please pick up." "I'm so sorry. I'm coming home now. We need to talk. My mom was out of line. I should have stopped her." The words were hollow, meaningless. He wasn't coming home. not to my home. The locksmith was scheduled to arrive in less than an hour. I saved the PDF to a secure folder on my computer, my mind racing. This document was ammunition. It was a nuclear bomb in my arsenal, and Carol had just handed me the launch codes with her own hubris. Her obsession with my decency, her constant need to control and scrutinize me, it suddenly made a twisted kind of sense. It wasn't about protecting her son. It was about her own deep-seated fear and insecurity. She projected her own past sins onto me, needing to find flaws in me to distract from the gaping chasm of her own. For a moment, I almost felt a sliver of pity for her. Almost. But then I remembered her cold, cruel eyes as she tried to humiliate me, and the pity evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She had declared war, and her own husband had just handed me the battle plan. The doorbell rang, startling me. I looked at the clock. It was too early for the locksmith. I crept to the peephole, my heart pounding. Mark stood on the porch, his face pale and strained. He must have driven like a madman. "Anna, I know you're in there," he called, his voice muffled by the door. "Please, just let me in. Let me explain." I stood there, frozen, not making a sound. "Look, I know I messed up," he continued, his voice cracking. I froze. She's my mom. It's complicated." "No, it's not," I said, my voice low but firm, speaking to the door as if it were him. "It's simple. You chose her. That's all the explanation I need." "That's not true. I'm here now, aren't I? I left them. I came for you." "You came after I left," I retorted. "There's a big difference." I could hear the desperation in his voice, and a part of me, the part that had loved him, ached. But the wound was too fresh, the betrayal too deep. He started banging on the door, a frantic, desperate rhythm. "Anna, for God's sake, open the door. Don't do this." "Go home, Mark," I said, my voice shaking now with a mixture of anger and grief. "Go back to your mother." The banging stopped. I heard him sigh, a long, defeated sound. I pressed my ear against the door, listening to his retreating footsteps. Relief washed over me, so potent it made me weak in the knees. But then I heard a new sound, the jingle of keys. My blood ran cold. Of course, he had his own key. The locksmith wasn't here yet. I had nowhere to go, no way to stop him. I scrambled to engage the deadbolt, but I was too late. I heard his key slide into the lock. The tumbler turned. The doorknob began to rotate. This was my home, my sanctuary, and he was about to invade it. I backed away from the door, my mind racing for an escape, for a weapon, for anything. The door swung open, but it wasn't Mark who stood in the doorway. It was Carol. She looked disheveled, her perfectly coiffed hair slightly askew, her face blotchy from crying or rage, or both. Her eyes, however, burned with an unholy fire. Mark stood behind her, his face a mask of misery and defeat. He wouldn't even look at me. "You think you can destroy my family?" she hissed, stepping inside, her voice shaking with fury. "You think you can walk away and turn my son against me?" I stood my ground, my fear solidifying into defiance. "You destroyed your own family, Carol. I just held up a mirror." "You have no idea what you're talking about," she spat, taking another step towards me. Mark shuffled in behind her, closing the door and sealing us all inside. "Oh, I think I do," I said, a dangerous calm settling over me. I took a deliberate step towards my laptop, which was still open on the coffee table. The bank statement was minimized, but still there. "I think I know exactly what you're so afraid of everyone finding out. Let's talk about St. Jude's, shall we?" The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. All the color drained from Carol's face. She looked as though I had physically struck her. Her eyes darted from my face to the laptop and back again. Sheer primal terror written in her expression. Even Mark looked utterly baffled, staring at me with wide, confused eyes. "St. Jude's? What are you talking about?" he asked. Carol recovered in a split second, her terror morphing back into white-hot rage. "How do you know that name?" she whispered, her voice a venomous rasp. "Who told you?" I didn't answer. I just gave her a small, knowing smile. And in that moment, I saw the switch flip behind her eyes. The cornered animal was about to attack. "Get out of my son's house," she seethed. "No," I said, standing firm. "This is my house, and you're trespassing." "We'll see about that," she sneered. She reached into her oversized purse, her movements quick and jerky. For a terrifying second, I thought she was reaching for a weapon, but what she pulled out was a thick manila envelope. She threw it onto the coffee table with a heavy thud. "You want secrets, you little snake?" she snarled, her lips curled back in a terrifying grimace. "Let's talk about your secrets. Open it. Go on. Let's see how decent you really are." The heavy manila envelope sat on the coffee table between us, a toxic, ticking bomb. Mark stared at it, then at his mother, then at me, his head whipping back and forth like a spectator at a tennis match from hell. "Mom, what is this? What are you doing?" he pleaded. "I'm ending this," Carol snarled, her eyes never leaving mine. "She wants to play with secrets? Fine, let's play." My mind raced, trying to figure out what she could possibly have on me. I wasn't perfect, but I didn't have any skeletons in my closet. No rehab stints, no secret debts, no hidden past. What could be in that envelope? The uncertainty was terrifying, which was, of course, exactly what she wanted. It was her final, desperate power play. I walked slowly to the table, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could feel her victory radiating off her in waves. She thought she had me. She thought she had found the one thing that would put me back in my box, cowed and submissive. I picked up the envelope. It was surprisingly heavy. My hands trembled as I tore open the clasp and slid the contents out. It was a stack of photographs. The top photo was of me. I was in college, maybe 19 or 20, standing on a stage under a harsh spotlight. I was wearing ripped fishnet stockings, a leather bustier, and heavy, dramatic makeup. I was holding a microphone, my mouth open mid-song. I was the lead singer of a goth rock band for about a year. It was a silly, dramatic, wonderfully embarrassing phase of my youth. I flipped to the next photo. Me again at a protest against tuition hikes, holding a sign with a rather profane slogan, yelling at the top of my lungs. Then another, me at a Halloween party dressed as a zombie bride covered in fake blood and gleefully eating a Jell-O brain. Page after page of my young, messy, experimental, and completely normal life. I looked up at Carol. She was watching me, her face a mask of smug triumph. "Well?" she demanded. "Not so decent now, are we? My son's wife prancing around half-naked like a common harlot. A radical street agitator. What would our friends at the country club say if they saw these? What would Mark's clients think?" I looked at the photos again, and then back at her expectant face, and a laugh bubbled up from deep inside me. It started as a chuckle, then grew into a full-blown, tear-streaming, side-aching laugh. I laughed until I couldn't breathe. The confusion on Carol's face was priceless. This was not the reaction she had anticipated. "What's so funny?" she snapped. "This?" I gasped, holding up the photo of me in my ridiculous goth outfit. "This is your trump card? You hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on me, and this is the best he could find? Me being a college student?" "It's disgraceful," she insisted. "It's my life," I shot back, my laughter finally subsiding, replaced by a steely calm. Yes, I was in a band, and I went to protests for things I believed in, and I dressed up for Halloween. These aren't secrets, Carol. They're memories. The only disgraceful thing in this room is you, a woman so pathetic she has to hire someone to stalk her daughter-in-law because she can't stand the thought of her son being happy with someone she doesn't control. I turned my gaze to Mark. He was staring at the photos, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Well, Mark," I asked, "are you shocked? Are you horrified by my sordid past?" He looked at the picture of me on stage, and a tiny ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I always knew you were a rock star," he said quietly. Carol looked as if he had slapped her. "Mark." "No, Mom," he said finally finding his spine. He took a step away from her, creating a physical distance between them for the first time. "Enough. You hired a private investigator to follow my wife. You brought this garbage into our home. You're trying to blackmail her with photos of her in college. Do you hear how insane you sound?" "I was trying to protect you," she shrieked. "From what?" he yelled back, his voice booming in the small room. "From a woman who's creative and passionate and isn't afraid to stand up for herself. You weren't protecting me. You were trying to find a reason to justify your hatred for her, and you failed." He turned to me, his eyes filled with a deep, bottomless well of regret. "Anna, I'm so sorry. I should have stood up to her years ago. Tonight at the house, I was a coward. I let you down, and I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you'll let me." "Don't you dare apologize to her," Carol seethed. I held up my hand, stopping them both. I looked at Mark, and I saw the man I had fallen in love with finally clawing his way out from under his mother's shadow. But the damage was done. The trust was shattered. "I appreciate that, Mark," I said, my voice soft but firm. "But an apology isn't a time machine. You can't undo tonight." I then turned my full attention to Carol. "And you," I said, my voice dropping to an icy calm, "you wanted transparency. Let's be transparent." I walked over to my laptop, maximized the bank statement, and angled the screen so both she and Mark could see it. "This is your secret, Carol, not some silly college photos. Tens of thousands of dollars for a 6-month stay at St. Jude's Rehabilitation Center. For what? Alcohol? Pills? What's your secret shame? The one you're so terrified of that you have to project it onto everyone around you." Carol stared at the screen, her face crumbling. All the fight, all the venom just drained out of her, leaving behind a frail, terrified old woman. Mark looked at the statement, his eyes wide with shock. "Mom, is this true?" he whispered. She crumpled onto the sofa, her face in her hands, and for the first time I heard a genuine, soul-wrenching sob escape her lips. In the end, I did change the locks, but I didn't throw Mark out. I made him move into the guest room. We started therapy both individual and as a couple. It was a long, brutal process of rebuilding. He had to learn to set boundaries with his mother, and I had to learn if I could ever truly trust him again. Carol finally admitted she had a prescription pill addiction after a botched surgery years ago. Her husband had sent me that statement not as a weapon, but as a desperate, last-ditch cry for help, hoping I was strong enough to force the truth into the light. Carol and Mark's relationship is still strained, but he visits her now on his terms, in neutral territory. Sunday dinners are a thing of the past. My father-in-law calls me sometimes, just to thank me. He says I didn't destroy their family. I lanced a boil that had been poisoning them for years. It's been a year. Mark and I are still working on it. Some days are better than others. He moved back into our bedroom a few months ago. The other night, I was digging through an old box and found the photos Carol had tried to use against me. I showed them to Mark. He picked up the one of me on stage in the ridiculous goth outfit, and he smiled. "We should frame this," he said, "to remind us that a decent girl isn't one with nothing to hide. She's one who has nothing to be ashamed of." And for the first time in a long time, I believed we were actually going to be okay.